Hey guys, good afternoon. Welcome back to class. We have about 6 minutes till it's 12:45, so I'm just getting the stream established for now. But welcome back wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. Appreciate your attendance. Give me 1 second. I need to just close the window and get myself a soft drink. I'll be right back. Okay. Great. Okay, guys, just hang tight for about 5 minutes, and then we should be good to go. Hello, everybody. Just hanging in there till it's 12:45. Hey, Paul, how's it going? Welcome back. Pretty good. You know, another busy week. A lot of grading I've been doing, teaching, normal stuff. We had some rain yesterday. That was an interesting change of weather, I guess. It's been pretty sunny. I'm happy that it's getting close to spring. Spring break is a few weeks out, so that's always nice too. So yeah, I guess I can't complain. Hi there, Lauren. Yeah, there was thunder here too. It was actually a very, very powerful lightning bolt that hit close to my where I live, because it like shook the walls, the thunder afterwards, so I could tell that it hadn't been too far away. Thankfully, though, it just kind of was like the first half of the day. It seems like it all cleared up. Just a couple more minutes. Long Beach, so not too far from Orange Coast College. I used to just commute there, go up PCH, and that's a nice drive along the coast. Yeah, there was lightning and thunder here for sure. The lightning was close enough that you could see the flash like in the house, and then it shook the walls a little bit. Oh, the block of Orange, right? Like it was like kind of like near the junction of the 57 and the 22 or something like that. Yeah, I know that where that is. I lived in Orange County for a long time when I was in grad school, so what is that? Almost 7 years. Yes, the deadly Orange Crush. It's a tough bottleneck. You know, during the early days of the pandemic, it seemed like it was finally clear for a little while. I was like, wow, I've never been able to actually just drive straight through because so many fewer people were commuting. but it started to build back up now, I think. Okay. Hey, Trevor. Good to see all you guys. Signed up for the whole COVID vaccine, so I don't know. I'm waiting for my appointment now. I'm eligible as an educator, so that's kind of cool. So hopefully I can get fully vaccinated in the next month or so. And then kind of start hanging out with more people like I used to. Hi, guys. Hello, everybody. Hi, Jake. Okay. Good to see you guys, everyone here. All right, then. Welcome back, everybody. It's now 12:45, so let's get underway again. Thanks again for being here as usual. Appreciate all your guys' attendance and hard work in this class, and I'm sure all your other classes. So good job so far. We're making progress through the semester. Looking forward to the midterm. That's a few weeks out. Right now it's Thursday, March 4th, and your midterm is 2 weeks from today on March 18th. No, I keep saying the wrong date. Thank you, guys. It's 3 weeks from today, March 25th. So we have a couple more weeks to get prepared. The goal today is to try our best to finish off the notes in Chapter 3. I think that we made enough progress that we will be able to finish all those Chapter 3 notes today. And then next week, we'll spend plenty of time on Chapter 4. And then eventually after that, we will start to review for the midterm. Here's another thing to notice. I just sent off, hey, Noah and Kayla, Jake, Anthony, Austin, Tatsuma, Trevor, and all the rest. It's good to see you guys. I just wanted to mention that just a moment ago, right before class, I sent off the notice to Canvas that I pretty much have finished grading all the first quizzes. So all the other assignments so far have been graded. Anybody who's interested in their scores on those, please just email me. And whenever you do, I'll get back to you within 48 hours with your grade and whatever comments that you would need to know about for your assignment. So just a little update. Class keeps moving forward. We did the quiz last Thursday. It's been a week. Now I finished the grading. And so it'll just take a little bit of time. I get a lot of emails, so that's why I give myself a window of time, about 48 hours max. But don't worry, if you send me a message, you'll get a reply. And over the weekend, I'll just be replying to all the messages that I get. So you do have to ask for your grades. You have to inquire with me because I keep a physical and an electronic grade book of my own, but I don't upload all the grades piecemeal throughout the semester to Canvas or some other publicly available grade roster. So you just have to check with me and I'll tell you your score. Noah, sorry, but you have a doctor's appointment at 1:50. Not to worry. Thanks for letting me know. As usual, just catch up with the lost material or the last few notes later, and you'll be good to go. It might even be that the notes that we have for today don't occupy the full class period. I'm not sure how much time it will take, but whenever we're done, then that'll be that. Okay, guys, so thanks again. And if you haven't had a chance yet, just make sure to always leave some kind of comment behind, whatever you want to say, and then that'll be my way of kind of keeping tabs on the attendance throughout the semester. Okay, perfect. So welcome back, like I said. Sorry, let me get I like to always have my phone running the stream on as a sort of backup. That gives me the ability to sometimes block comments and see them coming in a little faster and all that. Oh yeah, well, thanks, Noah. I mean, it's all there. The information's out there. All I'm doing is just presenting it to you. It's not like I'm creating the ideas or information, but I'm directing you towards helpful lessons for your life and for your studies. So yeah, guys, let's continue then. We were talking last meeting about Chapter 3, which is all about language and communication. So I just have a couple of little points of review, and then we'll take the lecture forward from there. First of all, we started this chapter with the description of what knowledge is in the first place. Well, you're getting, I guess, the full benefit of the online tools at your disposal, Noah. Yeah, it's very expensive there for sure. but hopefully they're getting something good for their money. But yeah, back to this. What's language, anybody? Can somebody tell me that? We described it. It's a system of something. It involves certain things. So let's just kind of get back into the topic with that as a first question to open up with. What's language? If you could look in your notes or remember the discussion or see in the book, let's get that on the table and then we'll go from there. Language. I mean, language is so interesting because we use it all the time, but we don't usually reflect on it. Like you just say stuff, you read stuff, but it's a little philosophical to take a step back and be like, what are these sounds? Or what are these little, images that we're looking at? Good, Trevor. So it's a system of communication which involves a set of symbols. The symbols in language can be of three possible kinds. Spoken, so auditory signals that you can hear with your ears. Written, which are inscriptions, like that form letters, words, sentences, paragraphs. And then you have nonverbal forms of symbolic communication, like sign language, hand gestures, and tone of voice. So human language is a big part of what makes us human beings. It's the thing that distinguishes us, the ability to have complex informational content that we can preserve, record, and transmit to any number of people around the world and any future audience. There's thousands of world languages. People don't all necessarily agree whether we have a common universal grammar, but that seems to be the predominant view in linguistics. We talked after that about different functions of language, things that language can be used to do or to accomplish. One of the functions, the primary function, is the informative function of language. That's just when you say or write things that have a truth value. So when you make statements that are either true or false. Like if I say that the capital of California is Sacramento, just a piece of true information provided to a person. But false information exists too, of course. Like a person could say the world is flat, which is not the case. So you, of course, as a critical thinker, have to sometimes distinguish between true and false info that you hear from whatever source. That's a big part of what we're trying to be better at in this class. There's also the directive function of language, which is when language is used to influence or direct behavior. So that involves the use of imperatives, commands, like saying to somebody, sit down, or Peachy, sit down. Get off the table, stop scratching that. Anyway, you probably wouldn't spend a lot of your time giving directives to your cat, but just while she's here, she's, a good assistant to the lesson. Go ahead, Peach. Thank you. There's also expressive language, which is language that's used to convey feelings or attitudes, and it's supposed to bring about an emotional impact on the hearer or on the audience. So you can think of song lyrics, poems, and verse, which don't convey factual, informative content, nor do they direct you to do anything, but they try to instill within you like a kind of emotional quality. And then there's ceremonial language, language used in sort of official or formal situations, like wedding procedures, legal court procedures, Miranda rights, oath of office, and maybe even certain forms of polite greeting in which there are expected conventions on how you complete the interaction. Okay, and then we talked about nonverbal language, which can include hand gesture and tone of voice. So it's important to keep in mind not just what you say, but how you use body language and nonverbal cues to either reinforce or in some cases undermine what you're saying. So use all those different tools at your disposal, hand gesture, nod, bring people into the discussion more vividly with the use of these other external aids, aside from just the speech and writing itself. Be skilled in the use of images, video, and photo to further enhance your ability to convey information or to present it. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about different types of meaning and different types of definitions, and that's where we, I guess, did run out of time. So we distinguished the difference between denotative and connotative meaning. Denotative meaning is the meaning that a word has when you think of its official kind of dictionary definitions. So just giving the essential attributes of it without any kind of positive or negative associations built into it, no slang understanding or meaning. So like the word dog referring to the type of animal that mammal species is. On the other hand, there is connotative meaning, which is oftentimes not the literal dictionary definition. It's not the denotative meaning. It's based on past experience and associations, and therefore it can be a kind of either positive or negative in connotation. So a single word like dog or cool can have the denotative sense, And then it could also be used as a term of insult or a term of companionship, depending on the type of associations being implied by the use. Okay, after that, we talked about 3 different types of definitions: stipulative definitions, definitions that are given to new words which appear in the lexicon. Since language is always changing and certain words emerge and others go out of use, stipulative definitions are given to those words which are coming in as new terms. So that could refer to like new types of technology, new types of social practices or understandings of things, like gigabyte, laptop, skyscraper, stuff like that. Then there were the theoretical definitions, which are just simply definitions of scientific terms that you would learn about in like a science course or a course of study on that topic in science, like force, mass, gravity, acceleration, entropy. And the last thing that we talked about were operational definitions. So operational definitions are just the use of a boundary or some type of threshold in order to invent a standard so that we can have standardized use of a word. So for example, obesity, famously people are all over the place when they think about what obesity means just in their subjective understanding of it. But for medical purposes, we want to have a common standard that we can apply universally. So then we use BMI as the numeric metric above or below which of a certain value a person is classified as being medically obese. Same with driving under the influence. 0.08 is the level of blood alcohol content that under our California state law, you're defined as being under the influence when you rise above that level. Even if some people may feel more or less capable at that level, we have to have a uniform standard under the law. Or the poverty threshold or whatever, other examples could be given. Okay, so there's one more of these items of vocabulary in that section of the notes to finish that off. So we talked about types of definitions. Those were 3: stipulative, theoretical, operational. One more, okay, one more type of definition, and that is persuasive definitions. Okay, so the label given to this in the book is persuasive definition, and the thing about these is you have to kind of treat them with a dose of skepticism, because this is a definition which is given to influence other people to accept someone's point of view on something. So used to influence others to accept one's point of view or perspective. Okay, so these are not neutral definitions. These are not just the denotative basic sense of the term, but rather it's a kind of loaded definition which is given, and therefore it exhibits a kind of skewed perspective or bias about the concept that's being defined. Someone who gives a persuasive definition is usually trying to get you to think or feel a certain type of way about the thing which they're defining with this given definition. So like here, I'll give you some examples. Some of these are given in the book. What if a person, you ask them, what's taxation? Or maybe you wouldn't ask that, but someone could ask a person this question. What is taxation? Someone who's not familiar with the word. And so imagine that this answer comes back from whoever they asked. Oh, so you want to know what is taxation? Well, that's a great question, and I've got strong views on that. I'll tell you what taxation is, sir, or ma'am, or whoever. It's theft. Taxation is theft. That's when the state comes and steals the workers' hard-earned money and income so that they can spend it on projects which the person probably doesn't even need or agree with. So I'll tell you, taxation is straight up theft. Now, is that a regular definition? It's a persuasive definition. What's this person trying to get somebody to think about the whole concept of taxation if they define it as so-called theft? You can tell me in the chat. What's the sort of not so hidden message behind this way of defining what taxation is? What do you think? Not too hard, huh? If you say taxation's theft, what are you trying to basically put across to somebody? That what? That it's bad, that it's not worthy of support, that it's something that's fundamentally unjust or illegitimate. Yeah, so, well, Kayla, yes, of course they wanted to think taxation is theft, but if we extend that into like a more broad conclusion, they just think it's bad and they want you to have the same response or same thought. But that's not a neutral definition of taxation. If you wanted to just define it in a way where someone can come to their own conclusions about how they think it is, whether it's good or bad, then you could just tell the person, well, it's the appropriation of revenue from people's income in order to fund public programs. So is this good? Is this bad? Well, that's a separate discussion, but we don't need to be told how to feel about something when we're just asking what a word means. So it's usually a giveaway when a person has like charged emotional language and stuff as they define a given concept. And not just saying taxation is theft. So that's like, hardcore libertarian type person, the state shouldn't exist or whatever. But you can imagine on the opposite side of the spectrum, the same thing being said. Like someone asks, well, what is private property or capital? And someone says, oh, well, capital is theft. People think they're just accumulating private wealth, but what they're really doing is divesting money from people that are in greater need and hoarding it for themselves, etc. So you can imagine a person with a heavy, like socialist type of bent taking a definition of something like private property or capital and labeling it with a negative connotation. And you can imagine someone on the opposite ideological spectrum doing the opposite. So these are the way of defining things that don't let us get to the truth on our own or come to our own conclusions. Paul, you say, where they post for and against as submitted by the sponsors. Well, I don't know about that, Paul. I mean, Paul, you're drawing sweeping conclusions about just the fact that voter guides exist. Let's not say voter guides are full of bias and just biased definitions. It's individuals who, make poor political arguments based on the literature in the voter guides who we would find criticisms of. But I'm not teaching you in this class, hey, voter guides are full of bias and spin and don't read them. No, I'm not saying that. You should read the voter guides, and those are solid arguments that are written by like just neutral, nonpartisan professionals. Of course, it's their job to explain in the arguments listed there why a person would have any reason to vote for or against it. But it's not like people who just run elections and try and give you literature on the election are somehow like agents of some kind of ideological operation trying to just warp your mind. I mean, that's an official source, these voter guides. So that's not given by like the Republican Party, the Democratic Party. It's given by elections officials, and those are nonpartisan officials. But anyway, not the best example. Let me give you other examples, though. What if someone says, what's genetic engineering? And the person replies, oh, it's playing God. It's playing God. It's taking nature and manipulating it to whatever human purpose. And that's obviously wrong. So, you're trying to emphasize by describing it that way that this is some kind of interference into the works of nature that's unnatural and bad. But, there are legitimate reasons why people might want to have like genetically modified crops to have better output for the consumer. The certain types of vegetables and fruits that we want to produce, we can sometimes genetically engineer them to optimize them for human consumption. So a neutral definition of genetic engineering would just be manipulation of genetic material for some human end. And whether that's good, bad, or something in between is a moral debate to be had separate from the definition itself. So persuasive definitions, maybe there's other things in the book. Let me see what it says there. And again, the takeaway, they often use emotional language, so that's a big hint. When you ask someone, what does something mean? Like, what is abortion? And they say, oh, well, it's the horrible, terrible, no good, just disgusting act of killing a child. Well, abortion in the denotative sense is just the intentional termination of pregnancy by the bearer of the fetus. Is this something that's good, bad? Well, moral arguments exist on both sides, but we're not asking about the moral debate. We just want to know what the fact of the word means. So let me read from the book, just if there's a little more I can add to that. Yeah, so here we go. Sorry, one second. Thank you, guys. Persuasive definition. Definition used to influence others to accept your point of view. The definition of taxation as a form of theft or genetic engineering as playing God are both examples of persuasive definition. They often use emotional language, such as the emotionally charged term theft in the first definition. There's nothing inherently wrong with using persuasive or emotional language. In poetry and fiction, for example, it's clearly appropriate. However, if the primary intention is to convey information, then it's best to avoid that. Persuasive definitions, because their main goal is to influence your attitude rather than to simply present you with information, can be a problem in critical thinking when they distract us from getting to the truth. Okay, so just a little back and forth from the book on the same point. So then we can go on into the next part of notes from chapter 3. Talk to us about what are some criteria or qualities of a good definition. So definitions are not all equal. Some are more accurate to the task of defining the thing that the word refers to than others. And sometimes you're the student who's been asked to provide a definition of a concept, right? On tests and such, sometimes the question on the test is, tell me what this word means, state the definition. So you want to know what a good definition is, both so that you can give them and so that you can also adjudicate whether a definition you've been presented with is suitable or is insufficient. So we're going to talk about 5 criteria or qualities of a good definition. Okay, 5 qualities of a good definition. So first of all, a good definition should be neither too broad nor too narrow. Neither too broad nor too narrow. So a definition is too broad if the way that it is stated would include more things than the term actually refers to. So if it's just too broad and expansive of a definition, too general, then it might not be up to the task of specifying the actual class of things that the word refers to. On the other hand, a definition is too narrow if it has the opposite problem. If the way that it is stated would include fewer things than the word actually refers to. So it's overly narrow and tailored to be too specific. So let me give you some examples, and you can help me talk them through. Suppose that someone asks you, what's a car? You know, they're looking at that word. They just want to know what it means. What's a car? So suppose here's the answer that came back from somebody. You're asking, what's a car? Okay, well, it's a mode of transportation. That's what it is. So there's your definition. Mode of transport. So what do you think is wrong with that definition? Too broad or too narrow to define a car as a way of transportation? Too broad or too narrow? What do you think on that? Because it's one of them. I'll wait for your answer for just a second. What do you think? Yes, that's right, Kayla. It is too broad. Because fair enough, yes, a car is a mode of transport. But that's not specific enough, because how many other modes of transport are there? You've got, you know, skateboards, trains, planes, subways, boats, I guess, in some cases. So just saying it's something that will take you from point A to point B is not at all specific enough. On the other hand, what if someone asks you what's a car and you say it's anything that has been produced by the Ford Motor Company? Now it's too narrow because that's only one auto manufacturer. So that specifies a class of cars, but not each and all cars. So a definition that's just right should refer to all and only the things that the term denotes. It shouldn't be stated in such a way that it includes more things than the word would refer to, nor should it be stated in such a way that it would refer to fewer things than that word. Like if I told you what is a cat, and you say, well, it's a mammal. That's the definition of cat, mammal. That's a little too broad because, yes, cats are mammals, but they're not the only mammals. So that really doesn't narrow it down enough. If you say, okay, well, it's anything that is in the breed of Maine Coon or something, that kind of breed of cat, that's too narrow once again. So I don't know. Let me try my hand at giving the proper definition of car, for example. It is a transport, it's a passenger vehicle for transportation, which has either a internal combustion, electric, or hybrid engine. Maybe I've gotten it down, you know. I'm not sure if there's certain features I didn't mention, but I'm trying my best to give a definition that just covers what a car is, but doesn't include more than cars, nor only a subset, a proper subset of what cars are. If I ask you what is a triangle and you say it's a polygon, that's too broad because there are other polygons. Yeah, typically 3 or 4 wheels, true enough, Preston. The 3-wheel cars are very rare, I guess, so I was hesitant to just say 4 because I know there are some cases of the 3. But yeah, we could have added the number of wheels. If it was on 2, then it certainly wouldn't count as a car at all. Although I've seen weird motorcycle type vehicles with 2 wheels that have some kind of hatch over the person that sits in the, I don't know what you want to call it, cabin. But anyway, guys, so we understand that. A definition can fail on either 2 criteria, being too expansive and general or too narrow and specific. So there's like an old children's story. Some of you probably heard it, the Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. Now, to be honest with you, I cannot remember even the vaguest details of this story, but there's one part I do remember, and it's something about porridge being either too hot, too cold, or just right. So, I mean, it's maybe not an ideal, perfect analogy, but think about it this way. A good definition is neither too broad and big, neither too small and narrow, but just right. So you've got to have a definition which is not so fine-grained that it doesn't specify enough stuff, nor too broad such that it doesn't narrow down enough. Okay. So there you go. That's one feature of a good definition. The next thing is this. A good definition should state all the essential attributes of the thing being defined and leave none of those essential attributes out. So states all essential attributes. So when you define something, you need to know what that thing is, and that means you have to learn about what its qualities or features would be. Essential attributes are like core defining features, just basic things about the thing being defined. And so you can't miss or exclude some of those or any of those basic criteria or attributes of something. So here, let me ask you guys this. Let's try it. If I asked you to define square, you know, the geometric figure of a square, there's a little better. What would be your definition? Let's take a tour back to the days of geometry if you studied it, or even if you didn't, maybe you can reason this out because it's not that bad. What's the definition of a square? Can you tell me? Because I don't know. What's a square? You know. What is it? Let's see. Take a wild guess if you have to. And I'm trying to test your, well, it's not a real test, but I'm trying to evaluate your ability to get all the essential attributes out there. Let's see if you can really get them all on the same definition. So what's a square? That's a question for you. Just let me know in the chat. Okay, so let's see what you're saying. Preston, an enclosed shape comprised of 4 equilateral sides. Well, we're close, same that you said, Trevor. A 4-sided, 2-dimensional shape where the sides are of equal length. But I gotta say this, guys, about the equal lengths. That's true, but there's also the rhombus, huh? See that? These could be 4 equal length sides, and it is a 4-sided closed polygon. So, angle measures. There we go, Kayla. That's important. So there's even something more specific we could say about the angles. So it's a 4-sided polygon with equal length sides, and the interior angles have to all be 90-degree angles. So we have to say that it's 4-sided because that's definitely one essential feature of squares. But we also have to say the sides are of equal length because otherwise we would maybe include the rectangle, which is 4-sided, yes, and also has 90-degree angles inside, but the sides are of different lengths. And to make sure that we don't describe a rhombus or a diamond shape, then that's why we have to mention the interior angles each being right angles. But if we say those things, we've defined a square perfectly. All squares are essentially that way. They are 4-sided. Every single square has equal length sides. And whether it's a big square, small square in terms of its surface area, the interior angles are going to be 90-degree angles. So if we missed one of those features, then we would not have an accurate, perfect definition of a square. It would have been off in some way. If we just said 4-sided object, that would have been one essential feature, but it wouldn't have included the others. So anyway, a good definition doesn't leave any of the basic stuff out. It mentions and states all the things that are core defining features of whatever that word refers to. So that's point number 2. Another criteria for a good definition is that it must not be circular. Okay, good definitions are never circular. So what is a circular definition? A circular definition is a definition of a word which uses the word itself in the definition. How frustrating is that? Imagine if you looked up the word square because you're just trying to study your geometry, and when you get to the definition, this is what it says. Square, anything that is square-shaped. Come on, don't you understand that's not a good definition because it's using the word itself in the definition. Clearly, every single definition has to be stated in other words because the point of the definition is you don't know what the word means yet, so you can't use it itself as its own explanation. We call that a circular definition because it's a definition that goes in a circle. You ask what the word means and you get pinged back to the word itself. So you have to give a definition of any word with reference to other words because we're supposed to build an understanding of this meaning by means of other words that we already understand. So if you say a teacher is someone that teaches, this is not a good definition. You have to say what it is to teach without using the word itself. Hopefully that makes good sense to you guys. But it's funny because if you're a professor or teacher like me, you assign students work, sometimes quizzes, tests, and sometimes you'll see answers coming back which are circular definitions because the student, it's like if a student gives up or doesn't know the answer, sometimes the last resort is that they'll just write the word again. So I'm like, tell me what's the commitment stage of your cognitive development, and someone just writes commitment stage. Like that's all they could come up with. They were pressed for time, or they just didn't have the notes collected. You couldn't get credit for that because that's just repeating the question, right? So you have to always give definitions of any word by means of other words in the vocabulary. But it goes in a circle and it doesn't explain anything to just repeat the word itself. Obviously, to define something, you're trying to explain the meaning to someone that does not already understand it. So repeating the word in the definition would not advance anyone's understanding, since if they already knew what it meant, then they wouldn't need to be given a definition. Okay, so it can't be circular. And then another point, a good definition should avoid overly technical and obscure language. That's what it says. Avoids overly technical and obscure language. Okay, so another thing that can go wrong with a definition in some cases is that, okay, it might not be technically incorrect, but the way that you presented it is so complicated and hard to understand for an everyday person that the definition remains incomprehensible and it just goes right over their head. So sometimes you're a specialist on a topic. And if you are a specialist and you have like expertise on some subject matter, then oftentimes you know jargon and technical terms about it that other people in the general population don't know. If you're talking to a fellow specialist, then feel free to use those kinds of high-level words because they're well known in the shop talk of people that are all fellow experts. But if you're trying to give a definition of a word to another person that's not a fellow expert, then you should not give the definition in such elevated and technical language that that person comes away with no clear understanding still of what you meant. Because again, the purpose of providing a definition to anyone is to advance their understanding of the word. But if it flies over their head and they hear the definition and they're like, still like, what? I don't get it. Then that defeats the whole purpose of stating the definition in the first place. Like imagine that you ask the doctor, they say you've got some kind of diagnosis of like a complicated sounding disease that you don't really understand. You're like, I don't know, let me just make something up. Like the doctor tells you, okay, I'm sorry to let you know, but you've got like, let me think of like a obscure medical diagnosis. It's a word we don't always use all the time. Yeah, it's kind of like I'm drawing a blank. Maybe just we say that the person has cystic fibrosis or something, and you ask the person, wow, that sounds not so good. Can you tell me what it is? And they say, okay, well, here's the definition. Cystic fibrosis is when like the tertiary equilateral fibers of the such and such gland, misfire into the da 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 da. So, you can imagine the person giving you this technical definition of the concept, but you don't understand the words that are used in the explanation either. So you're still kind of like, I don't get it. What is it though? Okay, so you have to take into account the level of understanding of your audience when you're stating a definition. When you're dealing with a person who has beginner level or novice understanding of something, you have to pitch it at their level of comprehension. Otherwise, it will go over the person's head. Here's a funny example from the book. Maybe this is a better example. So some people are specialists in the field of nets and netting. Can you imagine that? So people whose career is building nets, designing nets, distributing, selling nets. Okay, so take a net professional and you deal with them and you're like, your field of study and profession is interesting to me, but what technically is a net? Like, what's the definition of net? And they say, I love this question. I'll tell you exactly what it is. So here, basically a net is anything that is reticulated or decussated with equal distances with interstices between each intersection. Okay, so whoa, that's what a net is. For you to understand that, you'd have to be able to comprehend some of these embedded terms. Like, what is it for something to be reticulated? What does the verb decussated mean? And when you have the thing that's decussated at equal distances with interstices between each intersection, what is an interstice? So maybe this definition would make sense to a fellow net professional, but not to someone who's not knowledgeable about it. So make sure to take into consideration the level of understanding of someone who asks you the meaning of a word so that you don't just fly right over the person's head. Yeah, so hopefully that makes decent sense to you guys. As a professor, I was just thinking this on my mind. As a professor, this is a big part of my job, actually, because a lot of what I have to do is just give concepts to students and define concepts as I explain them to them. And so I have to think a lot of times about being the student and what level of understanding does the student have so I can kind of build a bridge from what they already know to something that they don't know yet. So you never want to like just talk at a level of complexity that exceeds the knowledge base of those that you are dealing with. So that's something important in language and in communication too. And then one more thing, the fifth thing, is just it should avoid emotional language. So I'll put it up here, avoids emotional language. That kind of comes back in a way to the whole persuasive definition thing, because again, when you start including within a definition words like awesome, horrible, amazing, terrible, it's no longer a neutral definition, and it's something that instead reflects the subjective point of view of the individual giving the definition. And so in the book they say, what if you ask someone what's a feminist, and they kind of hate the idea of feminism, so they say, oh, it's a man-hater, so one of these terrible man-haters. That's emotional language, which is geared to inflame emotions rather than to just give rational discussion of the issue. Or suppose that someone asks what's a man, and they have this is an oppressor of women. So those are just two examples given here in the book. A good definition lets you come to your own conclusions, and these emotionally charged ways of defining things are usually, again, trying to persuade. So good, we got that. 5 qualities of a good definition. Keep that in mind, that you're a skilled user of language, another main quality of critical thinkers exhibit. So from here, there's just a little more in chapter 3. The last few points are some different communication styles. So there's discussion of different ways of communicating. And then after that, there's a little section on different types of rhetorical devices. That's ways that language can be used to manipulate a person's point of view. So let's talk about those communication styles first. And the textbook refers to 4 different kinds. So 4 communication styles. 4 styles of communication. Okay, sometimes we miscommunicate not because of ambiguity or lack of clarity of what we have said, but rather because of how we have said it. And so it's important as a critical thinker to be aware both of your own communication style and that of other people with whom you interact. Basically, what you take to be normal, what might be like, in your family, everyone's kind of loud and a little bit, in your face, and that's just normal in your household. But you bring that same style of communication to like a different setting, an academic setting, a professional setting, maybe certain types of friendships. And it might be aggressive, or on the other hand, it could be that you have a very withdrawn and modest way of communicating, and that might seem aloof to some people in certain kinds of settings. So you have to be able to gauge the way that you have a tendency to communicate, and sometimes be willing to make slight adjustments and adapt kind of to get the most out of whatever the interaction is that you're currently having. So only by knowing what the different styles of communication are can we sort of assess ourselves and others and make the proper judgments about how to present ourselves in a case. So let's talk about these 4 styles of communication. Mentioned in the book, there's aggressive. And then to the contrary of that, there's passive. And then beyond either of those, I think a good, safe, neutral default is assertive. And then finally, you have the interesting, but also kind of frustrating passive-aggressive. Okay, so we're going to talk about all 4 of those and have maybe some fun examples to sort of back it up with. Starting up at the top with the aggressive type of communicator, okay? So aggressive communication style is all really about one priority and goal. The aggressive communicator, more than anything, just wants to get their way. They want to get their way at all costs, even if doing that is going to end up coming across as hostile, pushy, and maybe even do damage to the personal relationships that this person has with others. But to the aggressive communicator, I guess the stability and maintenance of relationships comes second place to just getting your way all the time. So that's aggressive communication, one wants to get their way at all costs. But what will it cost? Sometimes it'll cost a relationship. So one wants to get their way at all costs, even if this damages relationships. Damages or destroys relationships. Okay, so that's one type of way of communicating. We're going to have further comment on it, but I want to first list all the other definitions. So to the contrary of that, there's passive communication. And I'm sure you can judge just by the word, but basically a passive communicator is one who, to the total opposite, wants to avoid confrontation and conflict at all costs. So they want to avoid any kind of meeting of the minds where the two people are not in full agreement. So this person wants to avoid confrontation at all costs, so much so that they usually will back down easily and don't push very hard for their own wants or needs. So this is kind of like a pushover type, if you will. They back down quickly if there's any sign of conflict. So this is one that wants to avoid confrontation at all costs. And backs down easily. Okay, passive. One wants to avoid confrontation at all costs, backs down easily. Next, we get to the case of the assertive communicator. And I think I said, and I do feel this way, that if you're not sure how to act in a situation, you're like, what tone should I bring to this case? If you're not 100% sure, I always think this is the best, safest kind of middle ground because it has good aspects of the other qualities of or styles of communication that we see here, but it doesn't have some of the weaknesses. So here's the thing. With assertive communication, you'll tell people openly and honestly what you want or need. So you'll just directly, calmly, and confidently say what you want or need, but not in a hostile, aggressive, or pushy way. You're just going to lay it out and then you're going to tell the person what you want or need. But unlike the aggressive person, you still know how to like hold back when you're going too far because you do want to maintain these relationships and you do care about that. So assertive communication, one says calmly and confidently what they want or need. I'm going to probably need a little extra space, so I'm going to have to erase that and put it at the top afterwards. But one says calmly, so they're not getting heated, and confidently, like they're not shy about doing this. They're not being hostile either. One says calmly and confidently what they either want or need. But, and this is also important, but knows when to hold back, to not go overboard in order to preserve relationships. Okay, I'm trying to write the word relationships. It's a little compressed there, but you know that that's what it says. So assertive. One calmly and confidently says what they want or need, but they also know when to hold back to preserve relationships with people. So it's not like they're going to hold back in terms of what they want or need. They will assert themselves. But at the same time, they don't want to hurt people's feelings, overwhelm them with just anger and hostility. So this is a good, I think, middle ground if you're not sure what to do, because it's not like you're going to suffer from the passive person's problem, which is that you just don't ever bring things up that you need or want. You're willing to say those things. But you also don't just go around destroying relationships like the aggressive person was. So in a way, it's like you still get your needs addressed, but you're not hurting everyone's feelings. So I mean, that's kind of like a good, I think, safe middle ground. It does depend on the scenario, though. I mean, I guess there can be cases where it's better to use a different style, but I'm just giving you like a general outlook here. Now, the fourth one, we said passive-aggressive. Passive-aggressive is interesting because it's a strange combination of these two things, which you would think are just total opposites. How can you be both passive and aggressive? Well, people do that, and so here's what that is. Passive-aggressive communication. Okay, so here's how they kind of combine these two things. On the one hand, like the aggressive person, passive-aggressive communicator does want to get their way. They're all about getting their way. But like the passive person, they're not so comfortable just coming right out and saying it directly. So what the passive-aggressive communicator does instead is they try to use indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way without coming right out and just saying it directly. Okay, and then Paul, you say these aren't necessarily a choice to be made by a speaker, though. Isn't more of a skill of controlling our emotion to avoid aggressive and having confidence to avoid the passive? Well, I'm not so sure why you say it's not a choice to be made by the speaker. I mean, isn't it a choice? You don't have control of your own tone. I mean, I think most of us can control it if we just self-consciously monitor ourselves and take a deliberate effort of mind. So I don't know if I would agree with your first premise, which is that, I mean, unless you have further comment on that, we want to be assertive, but we may not be capable. Yeah, but I mean, part of it is directing yourself to do things that maybe you're not as comfortable or that don't come to you by second nature as much. It's a skill, yes, but you have to be informed in the first place of what the tools of communication are and what the options are so that you can even become aware of how you might want to modify the way you talk or act in some cases. And I'd say this also, Paul, a person may be more or less assertive by nature, and that's a fair point. Like, so if you're not as assertive naturally, it might take like more difficult intellectual and mental work to overcome your disinclination to be that way. But even if it's just in isolated cases, like it doesn't mean you have to reform your whole personality, just become an assertive person in general. But in some specific situations, you might want to be assertive, even if that's not your tendency as a human being. That's something that we can all do. I mean, I sometimes have to walk on eggshells a little bit, even when I have a tendency to be a little more assertive, because I know there are sensitivities sometimes that I have to be, aware of in the way I conduct myself. So each one of us can at least, I'm not saying to be perfect, that's not the goal, but to at least do a little bit better at having control over the way that we interact with other people and the way we present ourselves, because it's to your own benefit to do that as much as you can. That's like telling someone to just be more confident. Well, I don't know what a psychologist would tell you about how to implement these different strategies of communication, but just knowing what they are gives you the set of options that then you can fill in more context as you think about how to apply it to your daily life. I mean, there's only so much a philosopher can do, right? I'm not a therapist or a clinical psychologist, so I can't say to you, tell me about your parents and when you started feeling so passive in life, and tell me about, if you had any early childhood experiences that kind of shaped you in the way that you are. So yeah, but it seems non-trivial to just be able to speak a certain way at will. Well, I don't know. I mean, Paul, I just feel like you have a sense that this is something that is cognitively impossible for a person because we're just so, you believe in like genetic or biological determinism? People can't change, so you're sort of set in stone, and by the time you're, I don't know, of a certain age, nothing can be done. You can change today, Paul. I know you're, not the youngest student in the class, but anybody can still change and reform the way that they act. I believe in that, but maybe that's just a difference of opinion. Anyway, though, let's get to this, yeah? Passive aggressive. So as I was saying, this is the type of person who won't say openly and honestly what they either want or need, but at the same time, they want to get their way, so they use indirect strategies of manipulation. Kind of divide it from the other information. So you see there the definition. One will not say openly or honestly what they either want or need, but they use indirect strategies of manipulation to get their way. So now that we have all these definitions up here, I kind of want us to apply them if we can in a way of just thinking of an actual scenario. So here's a scenario I want you guys to imagine if you can. Maybe you can relate to something like this, or I don't know, we are in a pandemic, so the concept of roommates, I'm not sure if that's still happening in the same way as before. But anyway, suppose just hypothetically there's a roommate situation, people living together in a common residence. And suppose that in this group of roommates, there's one that is very lazy and irresponsible when it comes to doing chores around the house. And the thing is, it's become kind of an issue around the household that the other members of the household are talking about because they want to address it. This person creates a lot of mess. They leave behind dishes, dirty clothes and stuff on the floor, mess in the bathroom, whatever, and they never clean. And everyone else has to kind of keep cleaning up after this person because everyone else does the chores of the house. And this person seems to just contribute to the mess, but they're not picking up their, end of the slack when it comes to the chores. So it's annoying to the other members of the household, and so they talk amongst themselves. And they're like, someone has to go and speak to this guy and tell him that we don't appreciate it and that they should start doing a little bit more of their chores. One of us is going to have to talk to him. So who do we nominate to go? Now, suppose that the aggressive roommate is there. He's like, I'll go talk to him. Okay, now how do you think that could go? How do you think that might play out if we get the aggressive communicator to bring up the issue about the delinquent chores? You ever dealt with an aggressive person, or sometimes you are that way? You can probably give me at least a little imagined outcome here. What's the nature of that interaction, you think? How could it possibly go? You heard my scenario, right? Just basically, one roommate's not doing chores, the others want him to do it. Someone has to tell them and confront them about it, try to make this situation better. So we say, go over and talk to him, aggressive guy, and let's see how it goes. And I'm asking you, what do you think would be the result after that? How would it go, etc.? Because I could obviously tell you what I think would happen and probably what, a general description could be. But it's fun to see your thoughts too. Trevor, you have an aggressive roommate, the person being confronted usually gets defensive or feels bad. True enough, right? So an aggressive person goes in there like a bull, and they're like, they don't care if they hurt someone's feelings, upset them. So you can imagine them charging in like, hey, yeah, we need to talk. What's wrong? Oh yeah, there's definitely something wrong. Okay, you know about the dishes and all the other chores? What do you mean? Yeah, no, don't try and play games. You know exactly what I'm talking about. What's up? You're a bum, buddy, okay? Like, let's just get it out there on the table. Something's wrong with you. Who raised you? Do you know how to clean? I mean, look at us. We clean all the time. We're all busy, and then we're still cleaning your stuff. What kind of person does that? I mean, how are you going to let us just clean up after you like you're a baby? Come on, man. This is messed up. If you better start doing it. And the person's like, hold on. Don't talk. I'm talking. You need to do these dishes. You need to do the other chores. If you don't do it, we're going to have an even bigger problem next time. I'm not going to have to say this again. So get it done, okay? Now, look, if that's the way someone comes at you, on the one hand, maybe they will get their way. Some people, of course, are going to be intimidated, offended, hurt, and, it might cause them to check themselves and do the chores. But there's a cost here, right? Is this person going to feel the same way after that when they've been talked to so disrespectfully in such a hostile and aggressive tone of voice and insulting way? Probably it's going to make the conflict between these two people worse and maybe destroy or damage the relationship. So you got to keep that in mind. It's not like there's no cost to being aggressive. If you care at all about having solid relationships, it's not respectful to people, and people want to be treated the way people will treat you the way that you treat them. So that's a problem. Also, who are you dealing with? If this aggressive communicator is dealing with another aggressive person, then there's definitely the potential for escalation, right? What's wrong with you with the dishes? What, you got a problem I'm not doing the dishes? Yeah, let's go. So, you also have to keep that in mind, right? Things can get a little bit worse if that's how you interact with other people. At the same time, I don't want to say that it never has its place. Sometimes some people, you can't break through to them unless you come at them with a little bit more of an elevated tone. So I'm not going to say that there's never a call for being a bit aggressive and pushy, but you should know the context and measure your words carefully and make that decision in the most opportune circumstance. Trevor, after that, I feel bad for calling my roommate aggressive. He's somewhat aggressive. Lol, yeah, okay. Well, I was trying to kind of go over the top with it, but we've heard of those interactions, I'm sure. Now, what about passive? Let's go to the next case. What do you think would be the passive situation here? So someone's got to talk to him. Passive guy, can you go do it? Oh, man, no, man, I don't want to do it. Come on, we need you to do it, so go talk. What do you think would happen if the passive person musters up the will to go and actually say something to the person about their problem with the chores? Any guess or suggestion? What do you think? Because keep in mind, now I'm asking you about a person who wants to avoid confrontation at all costs. They just hate the conflict. So, Jonah, you say he'll ask politely. Jonah, it sounds to me like you kind of think that the passive thing is cool and it's not so bad. The thing is this, though, and I like how you followed up. A lot of us might say, oh, confrontation is so bad and awkward. I don't like to get into kind of conflicts and stuff. But here's the thing. You sometimes have to stand up for yourself, right? You don't want to just be a pushover who people can just exploit and walk all over and you never say anything. So the passive communicator, let me see others. I don't think that the guy who isn't cleaning will just make excuses and the passive guy will back down. Yeah, that's probably it. He'll probably say it's fine. Another reaction, good. Prue, he will be too mild and the lazy person won't do anything. That's right. So you can imagine the passive guy like, hey, excuse me, can I just really quick, just something the guys want me to say. What is it? Well, first of all, I don't really care much. It's like not really my issue or whatever, but sometimes when we're talking to them and everything, like there's this chores really, and it's like, I guess they're thinking you don't always do them and stuff. So like if you would do more, then maybe they would just not worry about it. I don't know. Like, what do you think? And then they're like, I don't know. I thought I did plenty of chores. It's like, yeah, kind of true. Yeah, I guess sometimes. So whatever. I mean, it's all good. You know, I just thought I would say something, but it's all right. So like, here's the passive person, so afraid to assert themselves, so kind of anxious and full of stress about the possibility of having a conflict or a meeting of the minds. And so they're probably not going to put the point to, forcefully. And if there's any hint of pushback, then they're just going to give it up. And so, yeah, Trevor, it doesn't bother me when you don't, but it's pretty cool when people do dishes, right? Yeah, exactly. It's kind of that scenario that you're imagining in that comment. The thing about being passive, sometimes it feels good when you're not upsetting people and you're not getting in fights and conflicts. Sure, that's like the benefit. But what's the cost? You don't negotiate for yourself. You don't assert yourself. And think about it in life, like if you just got a job, right? And now it's time to negotiate your starting salary. If you're a little more assertive, or even in some cases aggressive, you might get more money. If you're passive and they give you a counter offer and you're like, oh, yeah, I guess that's good, that's fine. Now you're going to do worse. And so it's to your advantage to know how to modify your tone. Sometimes we have a tendency to be passive, but it's like we have to overcome that and bring ourselves to address a problem or something that we want or need. So then we get to assertive. Like I said, the assertive communicator, it's a good middle ground. I think it's a neutral ground because it's neither too aggressive nor is it too weak and passive. This is the person who would probably come and say, hey, look, we just need to talk about something. It's been a point of conflict with some of the roommates here. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but it's just the fact that there's dishes and chores and other things around the house, and we do a lot more than you. That's just a fact. So we appreciate it if you can start doing a little bit more of these chores because we all have busy lives. What do you think? Isn't that reasonable? And the person might say, I don't know, I thought I did a lot of them. Well, okay, look, I'll let you think about this some more, but just so you know, it's not going to be an issue that goes away until you start doing more of the chores. And we can talk about it again later, but it's definitely problematic. You ought to take a look at it, and then we can all have a good time in this house and be conflict-free. So the assertive person's telling them what they want or need calmly, confidently. They're not raising their voice, insulting them, being mean or aggressive, but they're letting them know. And at the same time, they're capable of holding back and not getting too in their face because they care about this relationship going on and maintaining congenial and friendly relations with that person. And then finally get passive aggressive. What do you think there? So this is the kind of person who they don't want to come right out and say it, but they still want to kind of hint at it or get the point across in some other subtle, indirect way, or not so subtle, I don't know. What do you think could be an example of the way of dealing with this from the passive-aggressive point of view? I always think it's interesting to see what you can come up with passive-aggressive. So what do you figure would be the way of dealing with it then? Maybe you've met or handled or sometimes are a little passive-aggressive in your own way of dealing with things. So just draw on that experience, the life experience, if you have any. What do you think could possibly be that way of it playing out? Okay, sigh really loudly while doing chores around them. Dishes again. Yeah, awesome. Love the dishes that we all do all the time. Like stuff like that, making kind of catty remarks that hint at what you want them to do, but without directly saying, could you do more dishes? And we find it problematic or, not cool that you don't do it. Put the dishes in their room. That's another one, Trevor. So it kind of becomes this Cold War where both sides are not really coming out and saying what's up, but you put their keys or something behind like a mountain of dishes that have piled up, so that when they have to find the keys, they're inevitably going to be bound to see what's going on. Or you put some of your trash like in a place where they don't want it, so that they kind of get the point. Or maybe you just stop doing the dishes too and just wait until they finally feel like they have to do them. Maybe talk about them within earshot while you're with the other roommates. Like, wow, who's going to do the chores tonight? I bet you I know who won't do them, or some stuff like that, you know. So passive aggressive commentary like that is oftentimes a way of getting a point across without, you know, coming right out and saying it in a direct manner. And I guess in some cases that can work to your benefit, but a lot of times people respect it more when you're just willing to say things directly, and when you don't have to kind of hint at it, dance around the issue, or just leave it as an implication that they have to figure out. Because sometimes people will take that as an invitation to not do anything. Like, oh, well, they're not going to say it to me. You know, they're kind of making funny jokes and stuff about it, but they're not taking it seriously, so why should I? So anyways, guys, just know how you have a tendency to communicate. Be willing to sometimes cross lines and modify and adapt to the way of the other person's style of communication. I said passive isn't usually a good thing in a case like this, but again, that also depends. Two passive people sometimes can have a meeting of the minds. Hey, you know, the dishes and the other chores, I don't want to say anything because it's not a big deal to me, but like some of them don't think you do enough. The other guy's passive too. Really? Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I will totally do more. You guys really think that? It's like, oh, it's okay. No, not really, but you know how it is. It's like, oh yeah, I'll do them. So like two passive people are maybe going to be able to like deal with each other in that way. But again, you'll just get blown out of the water if you come at an aggressive person with a passive attitude, or, you know, other combinations that we can imagine. So after that part of the book, there's a little discussion in the chapter. Some of the stuff I decided I did not want to include, because it does have like a lot of talk about kind of stereotypical associations of how different gender or racial categories have a preference for communicating. And perhaps there are some like general patterns that we can see in like maybe feminine or masculine communication. But in the world we're living in now, where so much is up to the individual's choice in terms of how they want to express their gender identity or anything else, I don't know if I think that it's necessarily the case that like you're limited by your given category to communicate more or less aggressively, right? There are aggressive female communicators, passive male communicators, and all the rest in between. But I'll just say this, because one thing I thought that was in there that kind of made some sense to me is that there are cultural preferences for more, for different types of communication styles just in general. And like they say of Americans, for example, that we have a tendency to prefer more assertive or even aggressive forms of communication than like our European or East Asian counterparts, where community, respect for communitarian type of values predominates over like individualism and all that. So famously, if you're an American tourist going around in Europe or something, we oftentimes are described as appearing a little arrogant or offensive in the way that we aggressively communicate. Like, so in American service culture, it's like the customer's always right. You're like entitled to your good customer service, and people feel at liberty to complain and just order around people that work on them in a lot of cases. If you're in like Europe or something and you're like, hey, I need a refill, or like, take these utensils back, the fork's dirty. You know, if you start being pushy and demanding, then you're one of those like obnoxious Americans over there. Whereas if you were in America, that would just be normal and expected behavior. So sometimes you have to check against not just the people with whom you're interacting, but the social and cultural context that you are in. We have to be able to adapt in certain cases, and that's one, I think, fair example of that. But anyway, guys, okay, so we're going to go on from the communication style stuff. And then the last part of chapter 3 just talks about what are different rhetorical devices. Rhetorical devices are ways that language can be used to manipulate or psychologically persuade someone without appealing to reason. So we want to know about those tactics of language that can manipulate us so that we don't get manipulated, and so that in some cases we are aware of when rhetoric is trying to shape our views. So rhetorical devices, that's next. Okay. Just so you know, this is what I'm dealing with over here the whole time. Like Peach is just sitting, so you know, she's always there. Back to the lecture. Rhetorical devices. Okay, so, oh, watch out, teacher. She's about to fall off my lap. Okay, prove. There's this low context and high context communication style. So in the US, is it low context, you express everything outright. Oh yeah, so I mean, that's another terminology that is used in some other types of classes that deal with communication and linguistics. That sounds accurate to me too, but it's the terminology employed in a different, I think, course or text. But yes, let me mention a few of these points here. Rhetorical devices. One of them is euphemism. So what's a euphemism? A euphemism is when a person replaces a more negative or neutral sounding word with a more positive sounding word in order to kind of sugarcoat the truth or to make something seem better than it otherwise would without the euphemism. So replacing a negative or neutral word with a positive one. And why? Well, in order to sugarcoat the truth. Sugarcoat the truth, that's the language employed in the book, meaning to make it sound better, nicer, more pleasant than it otherwise would have. Okay, so euphemism, it's actually something that we encounter quite often. Let's try and figure out a few examples. So say that someone wants to sell a car, and this car is straight up old. It's an old car. And they got to put out an ad for the car to try and generate interest in buying it from somebody. So they have to describe it in the ad that they put up and they post somewhere. So what do you think they're going to say? Are they going to put the word old? Old just doesn't sound nice. It doesn't sound like a desirable quality. So they'll instead flip the word old and say something else that sounds much better than that. What do you think could be a euphemism for old in the case of this car sale? Reliable? Well, reliable is not exactly the same thing as old, but I guess you could say it's been around so long and we always relied on it. I was thinking more in your case, Anthony, like vintage. Hey, you want a vintage car? Come check out this vintage 1975 Dodge Durango. Yeah, you could say classic, another one, Preston, or retro. Look at this classic vintage retro automobile. Doesn't that sound better than saying old, ancient, decrepit, automobile? Maybe you're selling a house and it's very small. This is a tiny, small house. No one wants to buy a tiny, small house, but they might want to buy a house that they thought was cozy, quaint. Cozy, quaint, snug little house, just delightful. Now, it's the same exact house or car, whether you call it old or vintage, small or cozy. But the language here is shaping a person's perspective on it in a way just through the use of words. So we have to be alert to the possibility of euphemism because in many cases it tries to make us think a certain way about something that we might not have except for the use of language. Advertisers, marketers, political speech, sometimes accounts given in media can use euphemisms to try and shield a position from critical analysis or to make it seem better than it otherwise would. A person has died. This person's dead and gone, which sounds so tragic and final and dark. So let us say instead, no, this person they're in a better place. They've passed away. Passing away just sounds like you're going from one place to another, in a better place even. So that's really not too bad. But it's the same concept whether we describe it in either of those different ways. Let's see if I have more from the book. There's all kinds of euphemisms out there, so it's almost too many to mention. Here we go. So like methods of detainee treatment that were imposed under the George W. Bush administration. We're fighting in different theaters of war around the world. So like detainees taken into U.S. custody, placed in like Guantanamo Bay or other prisons that we've run. Sometimes people will describe like waterboarding, stress positions, and all those things as torture. But a euphemistic label was invented for those forms of detainee treatment called enhanced interrogation tactics, which sounds much nicer than you're torturing somebody. To interrogate, not in itself a bad thing, you just want information. Enhancing something, isn't that always making it better? So these are enhanced interrogation tactics. Don't call it torture, but it's a brutal way of treating somebody, which now language is trying to sugarcoat. Trevor, in your communications class, we learned that Lucille Ball had to say bun in the oven because you're not supposed to say pregnant on TV. Interesting, yeah. So some words, I guess, especially back in the day, right, would evoke overtones of biology, sexuality, I don't know, that were considered taboo, and therefore more polite sounding or friendly words would be used, like private parts or something, instead of, you know, like the direct terminology for genitalia and stuff. Body bags coming back from theaters of war, labeled in policy as transfer tubes, which doesn't sound as bad as, you know, a dead body in a body bag. Private mercenaries working in tandem with U.S. forces abroad, security consultants, instead of calling them mercenaries, which sounds much more like a hired gun. So anyway, guys, you know, sometimes advertisers, politicians will try and shield their positions from criticism through the use of a euphemism. Your boss is firing half of the workforce, so he's slashing the workforce. Let's say instead, no, he's just right-sizing the workforce, one of those corporate pieces of lingo that makes firing half of everybody sound not so bad. We're just getting the workforce to the proper size, and that's not a bad thing. So anyways, guys, understand that sometimes you have to see through the use of euphemism to come to like the proper and balanced conclusion about whatever's being discussed or described. That's one rhetorical device. On the opposite, though, side of this coin, there's dysphemism, which is just like the reverse of the euphemism. That's when you take a more positive or neutral word and you replace it with a negative sounding one to create the opposite, to create disapproval, to make it sound worse than it might otherwise be. So that's dysphemism. Dysphemism, so definition is replacing a positive or neutral word with a negative one with a negative one. Why? To create, in order to create disapproval. Replacing positive or neutral word with negative one to create that disapproval. That's dysphemism. So maybe, for example, someone's smoking cigarettes, just, you know, tobacco cigarettes, and there's a person that does not like cigarettes, and they tell them, what are you doing? Why are you sitting there with those? Anybody know what I'm hinting at? A popular dysphemism for cigarettes? I wonder if this term's still out there, but I think it is, and it's mentioned in the book. So let's hear it, if anyone knows what I'm kind of pointing at. Yeah, cancer stick. There you go, Trevor. I mean, that's a hardcore dysphemism. It's like you're sucking on this stick. It's going to give you cancer. You're going to get cancer from it. That's much scarier and more harsh sounding than just saying, oh, you know, a smoke. So not saying there's anything good about cigarettes or anything like that, but of course this person is using language in a way to shape that person's point of view on it. Without making a rational argument. I mean, you could make the argument like cigarettes can induce cancer because they possess carcinogens, and then you could give the reasons. But just calling them cancer sticks is perhaps a dysphemism. There's a policy in the United States, one of our tax policies, which is called the estate tax. Sometimes it's also called the inheritance tax. It's basically that if you have wealth of a sufficient amount, then when you pass away or die, you would transfer this wealth to your next of kin who you specified in the will. But if it's a sufficient number of dollars, like a certain number of millions, then the inheritance tax kicks in and the state collects like a certain percentage of the transfer of the estate to the next family member or whatever. Now, some people are, you know, bitterly opposed to the estate tax, and instead of calling it the estate tax, which just sounds like a kind of normal policy, they call it the death tax. Like, so that's supposed to bring to mind this association that you're getting taxed even for dying. Can't you even rest in peace and just die peacefully? No, you'll be taxed even for that. So it's supposed to create disapproval toward the policy, but, you know, we could have a rational assessment or debate about whether or not the tax policy of the estate tax is good or not. I think there are legitimate reasons for people of sufficient means to give back to the country when they pass on their wealth. But anyway, you could call it the anti-rich tax or something also. Correct, Ian. With policies and political debate, often dysphemism is used. Say that someone describes himself as believing in a woman's right to choose. a dysphemism label could be applied to them. Well, this person's anti-life. Or on the opposite side of the spectrum, someone says they're pro-life, they don't believe in abortion, so you could call them anti-choice, give a dysphemism to make their position sound less reasonable or whatever. So I don't know. There's other examples that I could quickly throw out there. You have a very devoutly religious friend or something, so you're calling them a fanatic, you know, to make their sincerity and devotion to the religion a bad thing or whatever. So in the end, we should make an argument towards a conclusion and not just use euphemisms and dysphemisms to shape people's views without giving reasonable evidence. Okay, so that's dysphemism, another rhetorical device. So let's see what we have left. Next, there's sarcasm, hyperbole, and lying. So let me go into hyperbole, I guess, next. Hyperbole, that's a word that many of us have already heard or learned. It's commonly referred to as a figurative use of language in poetry and literature, but it can happen in everyday speech and writing. Hyperbole is just the use of exaggeration or overstatement to distort the truth, to go beyond the facts. So that is it, the use of exaggeration or overstatement. Why? To distort the truth. Okay, so the use of exaggeration or overstatement to distort the truth. Sometimes people like to describe the things that are happening or whatever the topic is in these grandiose and excessively hyperbolic terms. Someone is saying, you know, in class today, the lecture was so boring, I literally was dying. I was literally dying trying to get through this lecture without falling asleep. Well, you know, the person wasn't not literally dying. Of course, that's like a heightened mode of hyperbolic expression to just emphasize how boring it was. And maybe that's kind of just, you know, fun and games and innocent enough. The problem, though, is that if we have a habit of being hyperbolic and always like a serial exaggerator, just exaggerating everything, this is the worst, the best, the you know, etc., that kind of speech. We can form it as a second habit, like a habit of second nature, and then we start to exaggerate all the time, even in cases where it matters a little more and where there's more important things on the line. So, I mean, what if you exaggerate and you embellish a lot in your job application or work history? This could come back to haunt you later when it's discovered that you're not being fully honest. Or what about if you're early in a dating relationship and you're overhyping and over-exaggerating facts about your prior dating history or success in life? This will come across as dishonest, of course, if it's discovered to be embellished or exaggerated at a later time. There's an old children's story, again, I'm referring to sometimes those because I know many of us have them in our mind. The Boy That Cried Wolf, I think. In that story, I believe, I can't remember many of the details, but there was a boy basically, and he would always cry out that there's a wolf, to try and, you know, make people worried about it. And there never was a wolf, so people over time started to just ignore him because they knew that he would exaggerate and that he would just say something false. Then I think eventually there was a real wolf and he needed people to take him seriously, but because he'd already undermined his own credibility through this track record of hyperbolic claims, he was not taken seriously. And so, you know, you erode your own credibility when you develop a pattern of exaggerating and distorting the facts. Then when people really want to take you, or when you really want people to take you seriously and something important is happening, maybe you've eroded your credibility to such a point where people can't trust what you say. So safeguard your reputation and credibility by being honest in most cases and try not to go over and beyond the facts and exaggerate them. You don't usually need to do that for people to respect what you're saying or to take you seriously. So the temptation towards hyperbole does damage your credibility. Wasn't there also the story of Chicken Little? I can't quite remember how that one goes, but he always said the sky was falling, and wasn't it sort of similar? Like nobody really believed him, and then one day it actually was falling or something. Details are lost on me a bit, but just popped up in my mind, free association there. Okay, guys, so hyperbole. In the book, type of rhetoric that uses exaggeration or overstatement to distort the facts. I thought I would die when the professor called on me, moans the college student. Some journalists use hyperbole for the purpose of sensationalism. Hyperbole is also found in politics when a grain of truth is exaggerated and distorted. So you got to see through the use of hyperbole in political speech, marketing, advertising, and just common interactions with people in life so that you can have a correct perception of the facts. Okay, so we'll be done with hyperbole. And here's what I want to put on the board for us to begin with on Tuesday. So there's only like a few definitions left in Chapter 3, but we have 3 full meetings set aside for Chapter 4, so we've got ample time to just get all of it in. When we come back on Tuesday after the weekend, I'm just going to complete this little discussion of rhetorical devices by adding these items: sarcasm, and then just deception. So we'll talk about sarcasm and deception when we return, and then that'll be the last few items of notes from Chapter 3. And then we'll start off with Chapter 4 next week. So in between now and Tuesday, I guess, just make sure to read Chapter 4, get through all those pages and take some good notes, and then you'll be ready when you come back to hear my lectures next week. And again, I remind you, I did finish grading the first quiz now. Also, the first homework that's been done for a while. So anybody that's looking for scores, just feel free to send me an email, and I'll be able to reply to you within 48 hours with your results and any comments. Okay, guys. So I'm going to let us go for now. I don't want to rush through the discussion of these last few points with just a couple of minutes that we still have. So are we all good then, guys? Let me know in the chat. I don't like to close the chat until I hear the students say thank you or something like that. So just let me know. Or if you have any questions or anything else that I didn't mention, just let me know. Okay, thanks so much, Kayla. I see you there. Thank you. To all the rest, are you guys with me? Just double checking. If you're waiting for me, okay, that's good. Thank you so much. All right, Preston, Lauren, and everybody else. I appreciate your attendance as usual and all your helpful contributions. So take a good weekend for yourself, and if you need me, just email me and I'll be in touch. So until then, I'll see you guys next time. Okay, I'm signing off. Bye-bye.